There is a disaster brewing all around the West right now, and it isn't one that is only going to impact some of us, as we are all at risk. We know that geopolitics has been strained over the last 3 years, with China emerging as an opponent to America's world order, with Russia making strides to regain lost glory in Ukraine and Europe, India striking its own path independent of all previous masters, and even Africa seeing a population boom that promises to draw attention and wealth towards them over the coming decades. Europe is suffering from an inconsistent energy market and torn allegiances, with the EU more shaky than ever, and America is even more partisan than ever before, with left and right constantly at each other's throats. But we will all be impacted by this, because regardless of what you think about China or what you think about Russia and Ukraine, we all rely on one saving grace keeping our countries moving in 2023, which is nuclear energy. Only things aren't as bright as they might seem, with uranium being the fuel we all need and massive problems suddenly becoming apparent that threaten to disrupt and change everything. Oil and gas have been more volatile over the last couple of years than I've seen in my entire lifetime, and that likely goes for you as well. For years, we've been told that renewable energy was the way, and for years, many have opposed that idea, but our governments marched on anyway, investing more and more into wind and solar farms while shutting down our own production of fossil fuels and even reliable and efficient electricity generators. And then it all fell apart, as we well know. Our relations with Russia deteriorated. Russia invaded Ukraine, the West sanctioned Russia, and Russia pushed back, targeting our energy. Instantly, it became clear that putting almost all of Europe's energy at the whim of Russia was an awful idea, but it was too late and the damage had already been done. Energy price spikes, cost of living crises, freezing people and our economies took a truly massive hit. Many of us wished we could look to other sources like nuclear energy, and despite some truly stupid policies from countries like Germany, who had been systematically removing all their nuclear energy, it appeared that could be our saving grace. Now, nuclear plants are being planned all over the world, in Britain, France, America, and even Germany too, and it makes perfect sense why. It's clean, efficient, cheap, and we can invest into it without buying more fossil fuels. Suddenly, it seems like everyone is pro-nuclear, apart from the seemingly stupid green parties who just so happen to hate everything that's actually efficient in the world. So we're now on track to replace oil and gas, but not with wind and solar as everyone had thought would happen 5 years ago, but with uranium instead. And that takes us to Niger, of all places, a country in Africa that has recently seen turmoil erupt. Just a few days ago, the democratically elected leader of the country was overthrown by his own military in what has evidently been a coup. The presidential guards who protected him from enemies stormed his very palace and threw everything on their heads. This is oddly much like how the Praetorian Guard used to do the same with Roman emperors thousands of years ago, but this is bad for obvious reasons. It's instability in a country that will directly impact millions who live there, but Niger has always been seen as a bellwether state for the rest of West Africa. It has actually been mostly stable in recent years, far more so than many of its neighbors who have been rocked by civil wars and terrible terrorist attacks. It plays host to a number of American and French military bases, and the government had been instrumental in preventing certain Islamic terror groups from gaining a foothold there. But that is now all up in the air. Niger's military have seized control of the country and its government, stating that they are the only ones who can solve the worsening terrorist situation. But we've seen similar coups like this happen in the past in neighboring countries around Niger, and the military juntas have failed to do any better time and time again. So what seems likely is that the entire region is going to get even more destabilized, with military crackdowns likely coming and increased levels of fighting not only in Niger but in surrounding countries too. Now, why are we paying so much attention to this? It's a human tragedy, sure, but we are always trying to focus on the economics for these events. Well, that is where things get really interesting and very dangerous. Niger is a massive producer of uranium and supplies huge amounts of it around the globe. In fact, they supply as much as Russia and twice that of China. So we have global energy markets that have been shaken beyond compare. We have fossil fuels being attacked by the left and the renewables being attacked by the right, but nuclear stands as a bastion of energy in 2023. And now Niger, one of the most globally important players in uranium, has just seen a military coup and is likely to see massive degrees of turmoil erupt across the nation. A civil war would be of no surprise to most people, and that would absolutely impact the countries uranium exports to the rest of the world, and perhaps shake all of us too. A civil war would be of no surprise to most people, and that would absolutely impact the countries that uranium exports to the rest of the world, and perhaps shake all of us too. And it's not like other major uranium producing countries are seeing unparalleled stability right now either. Two of the other biggest players in this worldwide game are two rather smaller and usually less important countries, Kazakhstan and Namibia. Now, while they aren't about to fall into civil war, things aren't looking brilliant either. Kazakhstan had for many years been a steadfast ally of Russia, but over the last year, tensions between the two nations have risen. Russian oligarchs and generals have been refused entry into the country, and Russia actually called upon their defensive alliance parallel to NATO called CTSO in an attempt to drag Kazakhstan into Ukraine too. And what did the Kazakhs reply? They simply said no. Cue the typical Russian state TV announcing that Kazakhstan had actually been captured by Nazis and that they needed a special military operation there as well. Oh, and of course, there was actually fighting in the streets in Kazakhstan as recently as January 2022, when mass protests broke out that the ruling government actually claimed was a coup, so they're not exactly swimming in stability right now. And guess how those mass protests were stopped? By the Russian military stepping in, the same Russian military which Kazakhstan is now banning from entering. And Namibia, well, things thankfully are more stable, but the government is constantly embroiled in corruption scandals that make our American or European scandals look like no big deal, with billions stolen from the public and a massive divided society that has wounds it is incapable of healing. And that's pretty much the exact same story that we saw in Niger that actually led to the coup we've just seen. And all of these nations are integral to the uranium supply of the world, our current saving grace in the energy market. What would happen if that one saving grace gets disrupted too? More energy price hikes, more instability, more political problems in the West, and all of that will impact our economies and our investments, and you best be sure that our governments know this and are watching it all unfold in great detail. Now, what is this all pointing towards? Traditional forms of energy like gas and oil are getting more expensive in the West because the supply chains are focused around countries that are hating us more and more. The war in Ukraine has been a brilliant example of this. Relations between Russia and America aren't getting better anytime soon, which means Russian oil and gas is going to remain off limits to us as well, so prices will remain high and supply chains filled with problems. Coal has been shunned by the West for years because it's too dirty, and renewable energies are getting more and more traction, but they're dangerously unreliable, and when their wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, they simply do not make the cut. Nuclear is the single best form of energy, and our governments have finally realized this, but they've also realized it too late, and they know that too. Uranium, the single most important material used in generating electricity from nuclear power plants, is still dangerously controlled by those same countries. Russia, even still to this day, export uranium to the US, and not a small amount either. We're talking about 50% of everything here. That's about 30 million people in America who get 100% of their electricity and heating from nuclear power that is 100% dependent on Russia deciding to allow America to buy it, and that's without even mentioning the fact that in the entire uranium industry in America, there are 237 employees. Not 23,700 employees, not even 2,370 either, literally 237 to supply 30 million Americans with all of their power and heating. Everything has been outsourced, and now we're witnessing deglobalization happen in real time, which means that outsourcing has to reverse, and we have to bring this all back. Now, you may be asking yourself a question. Why is Russia still selling uranium to America? Well, because they have a treaty in place that was signed back when we were all on better terms. But you know what's been happening to treaties that Russia has signed recently, like the one regarding wheat in Ukraine? They've been broken, and that means that this is such a dangerous position for the US to be in, and the US government knows this to be the case, and so do investors, which is why this presents us with such a brilliant opportunity. And that's why I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Traction Uranium, and in fact, I want to talk about them today in particular. Why? Well, we'll cover the fundamentals in great detail in a moment, but Traction Uranium are currently trading at about 25 cents per share, which is a near all-time low price. And here's the real kicker. The last time they traded at this price, their stock price went on to double over the following 2 months, so I hope that got your attention. Their ticker symbol is TRCTF, so let's get right into it. Traction Uranium has institutional shareholders behind it, Sprott Capital, Canaccord Genuity, and Research Capital, and these institutional investors and other high net worth individuals comprise a 30% ownership stake. But founders and strategic partners own an additional 55%, making it a very closely held company with loads of conviction from insiders. Their 2 uranium projects are situated in the world's premier jurisdictions for nuclear energy, the Athabasca Basin and Saskatchewan, and this region has been coined the Saudi Arabia of uranium. But here's the thing that really gives me confidence in Traction Uranium. Bowen Tan is the company's technical advisor, and he was instrumental in the 1975 discovery of the Key Lake uranium deposit as the chief geologist. And Key Lake is the third largest deposit in that basin and is home to the largest uranium mill in the world, and Uranium Traction's property, Key Lake South, is just 5 kilometers away from that mill. The Athabasca Basin is actually known as the world's leading source of high-grade uranium, with roughly 20 times the average international purity. And to top it all off, Traction Uranium have found what they call radioactive black soil on their site, which was the same indicator that led to the discovery of the Key Lake deposit back in 1975. And the method that they're using to try to find uranium includes something called a novel uranium vectoring technique, which was actually pioneered by Traction Uranium's very own award-winning Research Geological and Technical Committee lead, Dr. Pan. There hasn't been an issue facing the West that has this much support from all sides in so long. Nuclear energy is now seen as a bastion by almost every political side out there, both from the left, who believe it's a cleaner option than fossil fuels, and the right, who believe it's more effective than renewables. And with the national security risk present right now because of our lack of uranium production, 2023 is a very safe political environment for companies like Traction Uranium to operate within. Now, the West needs companies like Traction Uranium because they're integral in the processes for actually discovering resources so that the country can regain strategic independence and actually mine for materials like uranium instead of just shipping it all in from Russia. And let's not forget that America's demand for nuclear is getting larger, not smaller. 64 nuclear power plants have been added to the grid over the last 9 years, and 53 more reactors are currently under construction, and Traction Uranium are poised to capitalize off this reality. They're a seriously interesting company, trading right now at near all-time lows, and they have great prospects for the future. Of course, do your own due diligence, check them out, read as much as you can about them and decide if they're the right fit for your portfolio. But for me, they are the pick for uranium in 2023. Their ticker symbol is TRCTF, so make sure to check them out. If you just want to watch another video, then click this button here.